right, let's get on to this very, very interesting topic. Actually, there are three very deep themes merged into one panel. This whole conference is happening in one day, and we didn't want to leave out a single theme, so we kind of mixed and matched everything together. And I'm sure my esteemed panelists here are going to bring out a very, very rich discussion. But before that, let's involve the audience a little bit. Who can tell us what is intersectionality? Anybody? Intersectionality in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Okay, then this is going to be a very informative panel for you. Okay, who can just define quickly what is equity? We've been talking about equity since morning.
I think, ma'am, intersectionality is having belonging from multiple communities like the LGBTQ community and also having a disability. That might be intersectionality.
Yes, absolutely, Sumit. I can't see you, but I can hear and recognize your voice. You're absolutely right. The term intersectionality refers to someone having more than one element of diversity. For example, I have a triple whammy. I'm an Asian woman with a disability. So in the larger global context, it becomes a triple whammy. It can be anything. It can be a LGBTQ plus person having a disability, or any two or three combinations. Sometimes the second intersectional aspect develops later. It was not there earlier, but it develops later. It could be the aspect of aging or conditions related to aging. So that's intersectionality, and we're going to just talk about that in a bit. Equity, very quickly, equity really means what we've been saying since morning, taking care of specific needs and also making up for the backlog of the past. See, when we discuss this whole theme, the thought of privilege comes up. So let me just do a very quick check here. How many of you are not worried that you're going to be singled out or harassed by the police? Please raise your hand. If you're not worried that you're going to be singled out or harassed by the police, please raise your hands. One hand only. Everybody else is worried about being harassed by the police. Not a good sign. Okay, how many of you don't have to worry how your hair looks if you're going for a next meeting or event? Okay, how many of you are liked by your local grocer, school or bank? How many of you are liked there? Yeah. How many of you, if you're going for a meeting, don't have to worry that there will be, it's on the second floor and whether there'll be a lift or not? How many of you don't have to worry who's going to make the dinner at night? How many of you don't have to worry that planning a family is going to impact your career? Yeah. So you see, with the number of hands, or whether you raised your hand or did not raise your hands, these are some of the things which show us that we all carry certain amount of privilege. I just told you I have a triple whammy, but I carry a lot of privilege. Nobody is a monolith. We have our own privileges, and that privilege then makes us reflect on our third topic for this panel, and that is allyship. How can we be an ally to others? We heard the story of the election commissioner of how he was an ally. So let's just start with our wonderful panelists and see what they have to say. I'll start with Meha. Meha, I know that at Societe Generale, you have done a great deal of work in this area. You must be having employees with more than one aspect of diversity. How do you think that needs little special attention or not?
Thanks, Dr. Neeru, and thanks everyone for being here. You're right, Dr. Neeru. So we've done a lot of work in terms of, making sure we have an inclusive and equitable work environment for persons with disability. But at the same time, we have different streams, and these streams are all led by people from business, not by HR. So it's a business-led initiative. When I say persons with disability, me being chief of staff for the CEO, I lead persons with disability chapter. There's somebody from a business function who leads gender diversity. But what we also do is we make sure we connect together to see, is there something that can be done to bring a thing that can be useful to people across, right? Like for example, you gave an example, right? We have women who have, say, a locomotive disability. We have people from LGBTQ plus who have a physical disability. But at the same time, and I was discussing this with Mridula, it's not easy and comfortable for people to come forward and talk about it when it's not visible. Because most of the disabilities are invisible, right? People do not feel comfortable unless you make it safe for them. So what we really try and do is we have created a stream called inclusion, which works across these streams to make sure we do not neglect the aspect of intersectionality. Now, as we saw in the room, it's relatively a newer concept for people to comprehend, although it has been in existence. So the first thing that we are doing and making sure that people understand what intersectionality means. Because it is very easy for people to see it in silos, in sections, rather than seeing it as a transversal. So the first and foremost, which will lay the foundation of ensuring that we do not miss out on this aspect, is awareness and sensitization. So we are doing that. Secondly, I think what is very important is that the policies that we define, and something that we have done and we are doing, and one of the great things that we have realized is, instead of we trying to define it, we go back to the communities and say, okay, tell us whether this makes sense or not, right? And of course, experts like yourself also help us guide, tell us that these are the things that make sense, that do not make sense. The fine line between sympathy and empathy, right? That's where the essence lies. So we try and create policies that are inclusive for different sections, and we create a transversal policy which covers intersectionality. I mean, these are smaller aspects, but the impact that they have is much larger. I mean, more than we can comprehend or we can really realize. Because you go back to the community and ask them, they'll tell you, yeah, this makes sense. You know, this is something that we were looking for. And I think that will make an impact. It's small things, it's not rocket science, but that's what makes a difference.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just love the way you're talking about the transformational aspect and the small things, because we've been talking about since morning that maybe in this field, it's not one size fits all. You would have to go into the individual aspects and whether there are resources and teams available to check on that and then finally titrate the exact need. So I had heard from Simrat that you're going to love Meha and that she's doing phenomenal work in this area. It just reflected through Meha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Rakesh, at Indigo, you know, I have to say this, that what really inspired me, I don't know how many years back, when I saw this person on an electric wheelchair on the airport, Sandeep, on the airport floor, and I said, wow, this is powerful. You know, today I drive a mobility scooter. At that time, I was not using anything like this. And I thought, it's so easy. Once you have an equipment like this, it's so easy to move around and do work and to normalize disability. So what role does an ally play in assimilation of PWDs into the company culture? Because somewhere along the line, for this to happen, there would have been leaders, there would have been other people who were allies.
That's Dr. Niru, who she spoke about, is Sandeep. And he also, I think, lifted 150 kgs, became the Paralympic champion in one of the categories. Well, that's about Sandeep. But in terms of allyship, I think even before getting there, we try to understand that what are the barriers for persons with disability. One of the primary barriers, what I see, is the attitudinal barrier, which in the society, in their eco-space, what people face. And in one of the persons with disability national conference where I was sharing the stage with a person, and she happens to be the first Indian lady, Indian actress on a wheelchair. And so there is where we spoke about the fact that how does that lead to underconfidence of the persons with disability. And that's one of the main elements that we have encountered whenever we go ahead and interview persons with disability. My team member Suchita is there and she takes care of all of that. So therefore, I think looking into that, what's important element in terms of allyship, I'm going to break it up into 3 stages. One of the stages that I'm going to put across is the pre-hire stage. Or let's talk about the skilling stage. Skilling stage, there are a lot of NGOs, there are institutes who do these kind of skilling for persons with disability. But what is the important element is that they are not able to come and see how people work in the airport. I'm talking in context of the airport. So, so it's equally important for them to come and have an experience, a first-hand experience, at least to see how persons with disability are working. From there onwards, they gain a little bit of confidence and a little bit of self-esteem, which they go and polish up through their institutional instructors or facilitators. So that's something very recently we started, and we have done at least 2 of them in Bangalore, where one of the NGOs, they partnered with us, and we made arrangements for them to come inside the airport and make the persons with disability who are undergoing training see how it is possible for them to come and perform at various roles in the airport operation customer service department. When you check in, you see the people there all over the airport. That brought about a lot of confidence, that brought about a lot of conviction within the candidates. And we saw that when we interviewed them, almost about the percentage of success ratio doubled up. And therefore, I wanted to reflect upon the barriers of persons with disability even before I started talking about allyship. So that's at even before pre-hire, at the skilling stage. The next comes at the interview stage. See, one of the things somebody spoke about, the fine line between sympathy and empathy. You know, I was a customer service trainer long ago, and somebody said, you know, as a customer service, you should be able to say no, but add grace to it. So I was wondering, what does that mean? And unless and until I didn't experience it myself, or I discharged such kind of duties myself, you know, what it actually means is that even if the person does not get selected, not basis the disabilities, but basis the competency, add grace to say no. The interview or the recruitment experience should be phenomenal. And that's what we give priority to every time that we interview any candidate. And that has somehow brought about the confidence of candidates because we very constantly or continuously keep checking, taking feedback from the NGOs and the institutes with whom we are tied up with to understand that how has the experience of the candidate been. And that gives us a lot of feed to keep correcting on some of the areas that we may have gone wrong. That's one way to look at it. So basically I'm talking about the interview experience at the recruitment stage. That's allyship. Allyship at the stage when people come and join the organization. We put a lot of emphasis on assimilation program of anybody who joins the organization. And even before joining the organization, I think it's the first day. It's like my first day in school. You know, how do I feel? My parents leave me there, and then I'm feeling like an alienated person, extraterrestrial inside the school. And probably that's how the people they feel, because many of them would, as I said, the attitude barriers, they do not feel very comfortable. So to make them feel comfortable, we have something called a diversity, equity, inclusion champions. And these champions are across different geographies in our organization. We have handpicked them, people who have volunteered and not a forceful impounding of the roles and responsibilities. And therefore, that has worked really well for us. This is something that when we started this journey of DEI, spreading it across and making it very rampant, we already had a structure which was for the in-flight cabin crew, where they had something called a core lead structure, where there were these mentors and coaches for every newcomer who joins in, because of course people come from different geographies and they feel alienated. So we replicated that kind of a structure, and we have these DEI champions, which is currently working wonderfully well. And they go in and they are the responsible to ensure, they are like the guardians, and they're responsible to ensure that all the accessibility challenges are being taken care of. Like, for example, very recently with the inclusion of these DEI champions and their inputs, we had a speech and hearing impaired person or a deaf and mute at the check-in counters, which was never possible. So that was, I think, a great success for all of us at Indigo, because we have never seen a speech and hearing impaired standing at the check-in counters. And that became pretty successful, and then we started putting them at various different counters. So that's allyship. What's important, again, I just go back a little bit to the training side. At the training, we make them go through the entire training, not just some of the trainings that would help them be competent in certain roles. But we believe that they should be doing exactly like everybody else does, moving around at different roles and be very fungible themselves like any other employee. So that's the kind of empowerment, that's the kind of process that we have built in the organization for persons with disability. The last thing I would say is that in terms of their promotion, in terms of their life cycle phases, everything is as equal as anyone else. I think in the previous panel discussion, someone said that the policies should be the same and they should not be discriminated. But what is important is required is the equity part, which I completely believe, because myself getting into this space of DEI, I otherwise lead HR for in-flight service. This is something that I do over and above my in-flight service responsibility. And I've realized that equity is extremely important. And one of the slides that we showcase in our training is that, I don't know, some of you might have seen that. It's a very interesting slide where you see, everybody, there are at least 70 people being given a cycle, okay? And they are finding it very difficult to ride the bicycle. But that's how we teach equity. When Dr. Neeru asked this question, I was wondering, wish I could have brought that slide with me. And then there's another slide that showcases that everybody has a cycle, but a different kind of cycle. A cycle that Dr. Neeru has, a cycle that somebody else would have, a different kind of cycle that they can perform their roles very, very effectively.
Thank you, Rakesh, for taking us. In such a short time, you took us through the entire talent management cycle. Thank you so much. And for the in-flight experience, I must tell you this, that Ira and I both are vouching for, in the jury meet we were discussing this, we are vouching for a real changed experience in the last 3-4 years. When we used to travel Indigo about 3-4 years back, it was not as comfortable as it is today. Today, it is extremely streamlined, extremely comfortable. All right, so let's go to Shiva. Now, Uber is vast. We saw Uber video in the morning, and I mean, it could be really challenging. Excuse me for going off the script, I might ask anything that I feel the audience is going to like to hear right now. So, it might be really difficult to implement policies and structures throughout the vastness of Uber for people with disabilities. Can you talk a bit on that?
I think Uber is a very interesting company in this aspect because we are solving for inclusion of not just employees, we need to solve for inclusion of our customers, we need to solve for inclusion of our driver partners, right? We are a pure marketplace, right? So it's a commitment that we take very seriously and we're just getting started on this journey, right? So I would, with utmost humility, agree that there's a long way for us to go here and we're just getting started. Now, let me talk about a little bit about our consumers and our driver partners. Over the last many years, we have had multiple issues of our vehicles not being accommodative for people with disabilities. There have been instances where drivers have refused taking customers who had a wheelchair. And there have been instances where it's the other way around, where let's say in the US, we have had consumers who are vision impaired and used to have a pet, and then the drivers are allergic to pets, right? Now, how do you respect the drivers? There's a very different kind of an intersectionality that we're talking about, right? Like how do you ensure the preferences of both the driver partner and the consumers are taken care of, right? And needless to say, I think the responsibility for Uber here is for us to be the ally for our consumers and driver partners, and that's exactly what our CEO did. We actually formed a product equity team. It's a 30-member team sitting out of the US, and the only agenda for this team is to make sure that the platform is inclusive for all sorts of consumers and driver partners, right? And it's a long journey. In fact, I can tell examples of things that we have done, like for people with disability, there are very few types of vehicles that are available on the platform. So what happens is when you book on demand, a lot of times these vehicles are not available. So what we did was we moved all of these requests to a reserve model. So you can actually request these vehicles ahead of time so that you don't have to face the uncertainty of whether you will get a vehicle or not, right? These are very minor changes, but it goes a very long way in ensuring that the platform is inclusive. And in India, I can give you a very typical example. I don't know how many of you know, We have a product called Uber Access in Bangalore, where we have around 40 to 50 wheelchair-enabled vehicles that are available for consumers to request. And till date, we have had more than thousands of consumers who have used the product, and we keep this product live. Our ambition is to take this product to multiple cities and then serve a larger segment of our consumer base. But this is, I think this is a very serious commitment, and we don't take it lightly.
Thank you for telling me that. I didn't know. I was going to ask you that what about, you have Uber XL, but you don't have access. So you're telling us that in Bangalore, access has started. Wow, that is going to help me a lot. Thank you.
It's been there for a long time. I think we have not done a great job of talking about it. I think that's a lesson for us. But I think, from the best of my knowledge, it's been there for around 4 to 5 years now.
Does it come up in the app when you book a cab?
It does. It
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Richa, you have been a strong champion of DEI, not only in your present organization, but you were here at the Lalit earlier, and you've had an opportunity to see several people with disabilities, go through them, be an ally to them. Tell us some examples or stories of intersectionality that you have seen with PWD.
Thank you, Dr. Neeru. And thank you for, recapping this, that I started my DEI journey in the very hotel that we are sitting. And while I was with the hotel, I used to think that we are not doing enough. But now that I've stepped out and I look back in retrospect, I can say with absolute certainty that the kind of work in DEI that the Lalit has done is commendable. So I think the hotel, the group deserves a round of applause. And, when we started, Dr. Neeru, it came actually from a place of pure love. One of our executive directors, Mr. Keshav Suri, very, very passionate about this whole agenda. And the idea was to mainstream. We were not looking at it as a subject of doing it as intersectionality or, doing something for the people with disability. It was like opening doors and welcoming people, whoever is interested in working for the hospitality industry. Now, when we started working with people with disability, I realized that there is so much passion, sincerity, and hard work they bring to the table, which does a lot of things to the environment, right? It inspires other people, people who are able-bodied, right? A lot of us, including myself, get into this habit of, complaining about the work that we do after some point in time. We are not grateful enough. And I think when we look at people with disability around us giving their 100%, it is a reminder to us to say that, there is so much that we need to learn from them. 20% of the population in our country suffers from disability. That disability they could be born with, they could acquire, it could be temporary, it could be permanent, right? And a lot of this population is invisible, right? We don't see it enough, we don't talk about it enough, and there needs to be a program in order to actively have representation from the community. Because representation matters. I think when we have people with disability working in the organization, like I said, it improves the culture of the organization. People become, more committed, more engaged. And I think we start looking at things differently. When we are designing products for customers, when we are designing policies for employees, we start looking at everything in a much more holistic manner. Yeah. So in our organization, and I work with Max Life now, we've had a number of people with disabilities working with us. And it's interesting to know the layers, right? We're speaking about intersectionality. We think they exist in silos, but they don't. So a woman with a disability, a woman who is already from a disadvantaged background, is further dealt a blow or a whammy, like you call it, and has a disability. An example like that exists in an organization who started at a particular level and has grown and has got a promotion year after year and is a role model for so many people. not only people with disability, but able-bodied people as well. And there are many such examples. And I think one of the things that our company does very well is listening to them, right? Because the needs and requirements, and that's why the concept of equity is so important. The needs and requirement for each one of them is so different and so unique that you can't just have a one-size-fits-all. You know, sometimes the needs are very, very small, and sometimes the need could be accessible software. Sometimes the need could be some little tweak in the facility, right, in infrastructure. So I think looking at each case with an individual lens is so important, because intersectionality, the aspect of equity, and knowing that all of our starting lines is not the same. We have to cover up for all of the backlog that has got accumulated with time, and giving them the opportunities that they so desperately needed in order to be successful. So these are the few things that we're doing at Max.
Thank you, thank you. That was so powerful, Richa. Thank you. And building on Richa's point, Ira, that's you. That's your own lived experience of being a woman with a disability. Tell us a bit about that.
I think in India, if you're born as a woman, you're already at minus 10, and if you get a disability, you're at minus 100. So every new person that you meet, you have to convince them that you deserve an opportunity. It's not even that you deserve something more, it's simply about deserving an opportunity, deserving a voice, deserving of the chance to show that you are capable. The world automatically looks at you, decides you're a girl, so you obviously don't know anything, and then you're a girl with a disability. You're not even allowed to speak up and put your point across, or to show that you can do something. I was actually one of the lucky ones in the corporate sector, and I think that comes from the fact that in the corporate sector, people more look at your abilities more than anything else. So if you can show that you can do something, the chance does come to you. It might come to you slower or later, but it does come to you. So my experience in the corporate was actually better than it was in the government. Yeah, and one thinks that in government there is a mandate to be inclusive and to be, give everybody a chance. I was, just for the people who don't know, I was rejected thrice in the civil services exam, basis my disability, saying that we are not willing to accept this disability. And the only service that I was eligible for is the IAS, where I am currently. I had to go to court to fight it. I was initially eligible for 3 consecutive attempts in IRS and all the other services as well, but all of them refused, and I had to go to court to get an order saying that if she can work, then you should give her the job. And I finally gave the exam one more time, because even if the court order came, they would still delaying the joining, still delaying giving the actual role. So I gave the exam and I got into the IAS. But that attitude of, thinking that people with disability automatically defining their abilities as disabled means you are incapable of everything. That attitude affects all our lives continuously, and especially for women a lot more. Because women in our society are anyways supposed to take a back seat and to not, demand anything for yourself, or even, which might just be demanding something that you deserve, something which is as simple as an equal right to be present. And on top of that, if you're a girl with disability, the world is not comfortable with you wanting an equal space. So it's been a journey of having to convince every new person that I meet again that at least give me that chance, give me that opportunity where I can show you what I can do. And I'm not even saying give me something that I don't deserve. And I think that's been the experience of almost all women here in some way or the other. But if you're a woman with disability, that just gets added on.
Oh my God, the right to even exist, my goodness, that was powerful, Ira. And by the way, Ira has been an achiever. You were the topper in your batch, Ira?
Yes, I'm IAS rank 1 and I'm also UPSC rank 1.
And when such a person has to prove, like you say, every time, each time, you still have to fight a battle, you still have to prove how much, that really tells us that there is a whole lot of untapped talent lying in the people with disabilities. You had the courage to fight it through. Many may not have had the courage to fight it through.
You know, the best, I mean, the thing is that in my mind, I always knew that I was capable.
Yeah.
Most children with disability have been brought up to believe they're incapable.
Correct.
So, you know, even with the positive mindset that I was brought up with, when my disability in my household was never made into an issue, it was just a part of who I was, it didn't define who I was. Even with that, I could get here. But for all of those people who have been convinced by their families in childhood that there is something wrong with you, for them, it becomes much more tougher. For them, it becomes so much more difficult to even ask or even imagine that they deserve a space.
I know. Wow, wow. So profound, Ira. Thank you so much. And building on what Ira just spoke about, the competencies, Meha, what should organizations do? Well, even if it is because of a limiting belief. Let's say, like Ira said, there might be some people who have a limiting belief about not being good enough because that's the message they received in childhood. And that actually then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and turns into reality in some way for some people. What can organizations do to upskill people with disabilities?
I think that's a very, very important aspect, and it begins even before people join organizations. So as an organization, what we're trying to explore is to see if we can tie up with campuses and even schools to make them corporate ready, especially for colleges that specialize in training persons with disability. So we're trying to evaluate that. We've identified a few colleges. We are tying up with a few NGOs who master in this to ensure that people with disability, the moment they step out of college, they're corporate ready. That's number one. Number two, while upskilling and reskilling is a very, very common program in most organizations, it is important to understand that, you know, there are specific needs, and like you yourself mentioned, it's not one size fits all. There are specific needs for making sure that the upskilling, reskilling platform is accessible. Having that platform being accessible in one form or the other, you know, having accessibility widgets or having a sign language interpreter, making it available and accessible to all is the second most important thing. And that's something that we are doing in our organization. We make sure there is a sign language interpreter for all meetings, all town halls, all conversations around your job, any conversation that you have to have. We have sign language modules which people can avail on demand. So like any other language, we're a French bank, we learn French, and similarly, we encourage people to learn sign language. So that's available on demand. We have also introduced, in conjunction with NASSCOM, something called the financial sign language, which is available for the ecosystem to adopt. And I think that's one element that will play a very important role. And I think Sumit had mentioned that we exist in silos. Today, if all organizations come together and work on the subject together, you know, there are so many things and that we can work on it and have a larger impact. So for that, we launched our flagship program called Connexion, which brings organizations together, which, you know, where we ask for people to come forward for mentorship and say, you know, you will dedicate X amount of your time to mentor people with disability. Have a career fair for people with disability. So these are small things, but it's, you know, about having that impact. Having a siloed impact, like, you know, clapping with one finger, two fingers doesn't have that impact as you clap with all the 5 fingers put together. So that's one thing that we are trying to do, and I think all of us sitting here and in the audience, maybe if we can just try and see if we can work together on, it doesn't have to be a big fancy initiative. It can be the smallest of initiative of maybe collaborating with one college and saying we'll help them be corporate ready, or having career fairs together to ensure that people who are ready can be given job opportunities, or dedicating our time for mentorship guidance, because the guidance and coaching that's needed for persons with disability is also a little more nuanced, right? It's not a generic cape that a person can wear and say, okay, you know what, I can be a coach there. No, you need to have certain nuances for that. So if we can dedicate some time, come together and work on this together, I think we'll have a larger impact. So for
Wow.
me, I think that's important.
Wow. Yes, Shiva.
Dr. Sorry, I would like to add a few points to the thought on what can corporates do differently, right? I think the fundamental belief is there is just one way to do a job right. But the reality is there is more than one way to do a job perfectly. It's just that organizations are lazy to figure out and explore the other ways in which a person can do the same job, right? Very classical examples, we never thought a disabled person could be a Uber driver. But we actually had a driver in Ahmedabad, one Mr. Bukesh Bharati. He's physically disabled. He does not have, he has locomotor disabilities. He modified a car by himself and then became an Uber driver, and he's been driving with us for 6 years. He's done more than 10,000 trips on Uber, and he's still active on Uber. Right? It was a realization for us that this is even doable, right? We had for some reason thought it's not possible, right? But it's actually possible. We just did not take the effort to reimagine how that work could be done, right? And in my past life, I was in the e-commerce space, and logistics is typically considered as a male-heavy profession and not for people with physical disabilities. But it took effort to create a logistics hub where 100% of the employees were people with disabilities. Obviously, it required rethinking every activity, but it's doable, right? Like, it just needs effort to do that. So, to your question, I think corporates need to have a fundamental mind shift that it is possible, others are also normal, just that you need to look at the work from their perspective and then give them the opportunity to do it, versus giving a very blanket rejection that you're not fit for this particular job.
Yes, in fact, I hear it a lot, people will say, given our industry, we can have only people with locomotor disorders, or we can have only people with visual challenges. They have a limitation in their own mind that it's not possible in our industry.
And
So this is something that I've been actually thinking about, and I've been working with a lot of people on this. I think an easier route is if, we go back to how management studies started, wherein division of labor was done. So if we can define each job in terms of the abilities required, which would be mental and physical abilities, that automatically eliminates the idea of disability. Because every job, so suppose this job requires you to move from point A to point B. If you are able to move, whether it is through an assistive device, you can get that job. But what everybody does is they think of disability and then define the roles. Instead of that, if we start looking at it from the ability perspective, what do I need a person to be able to do this job? Instead of thinking, what can a disabled person do this? We just think of each job in terms of what are the physical and the mental abilities required for each of these jobs. We will instantly be able to hire everybody for almost everything, because with assistive technologies, most people will be then automatically eligible for everything. So that mental barrier of, us going on the opposite side of taking a person with disability and then deciding what do I do with this person, or do I want a disabled person on this? Let's look at it from ability matrix. What all abilities do I require for each of these things? And automatically everybody who's a person with disability becomes able.
Fantastic. It does remind me that when I was 17 years old, there were no automatic cars at that time, and my father said, let's learn driving. I said, how can I do that? I can't operate my left foot at all. And he would wake me up at 5 o'clock in the morning and say, okay, let's learn the steering. I thought he was the most cruel father. And I was really sulky about it. But then we did make a device where we joined the brake and the clutch with a lever, and I was operating both with one foot, the front and back. And then there was Saran Motors here, and we gave that device to many more people. So innovation can be done. Solutions can be found. Limitations are perhaps, especially in today's day of technology, limitations are perhaps more in the mind. And Siva brought out that point so beautifully, that a Uber driver with a physical disability, maybe 1 or 2 years back, would have been something unheard of. But it is very possible if there is a willingness to do so. I know I see a big times up there, but two people who have not had a chance to speak the second time, I'm going to ask them just 2 minutes each. Rakesh, I'll let you speak anything that you want to.
I'm definitely not going to pick up LGBT topic here. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that while we were talking about accessibility, and Dr. Neeru, you said that we should be open to allowing them to work in any role which is available. Some of the things that we also realized, we came with that mindset that okay, but then when we did the accessibility audit in the airport operation customer services roles, because there are a lot of infrastructural challenges that we see. People who work at the ramp side where the aircraft comes and the open, we call the air side. There are a lot of these buses, coaches that they keep moving around. So that could be a place where a person who's deaf and mute might not be conducive for that person, considering the safety factors. And but importantly, what we saw is that after these people started getting trained on all the various roles at the training center during their initial training, all of them wanted to be fungible in various different roles that existed in the organization, and some of them took their own initiative to create something or the other in their own space. And when they went out and delivered this into the customers, we had gotten some great tweets by our passengers, and that became an exceptional, because that's when passengers started realizing that, oh, in an India-based airline, how is it possible that, it is now possible that deaf and mute people are checking in the customers, because when you check in, you will say, if you have extra baggage, if you have a window seat, aisle seat, whatever you want, so how do you communicate with them? So, and that's what they are doing now phenomenally well. So, but I think there would be some infrastructural challenges, and that is something that probably is one of the biggest barrier I see at today's time, especially for a locomotor disability. And that's what in the national conference also, when I was there, this person who happens to be the first lady actress on a wheelchair, she said, I live in US, but when I came to India, these are the problems that I face. You go to a mall, you don't have a ramp, you go to some place, and then they say, come in. So how do I come in? I don't have a ramp. Yeah. So those are some of the challenges that you all the time see, and that's, I think, something is truly bothering. Though government has come up with the Rights of Person with Disability Act in 2016 and so on and so forth, things are evolving. But somebody spoke about mindset. I think that mind shift is very important to change the affirmation, change the belief system. I think that needs everybody to do a collaborative effort. I'm very glad to hear from you that you all have created some sort of an organization, some sort of a group which invites people to come and be a mentor. I'll be very happy to participate, and we can definitely collaborate together to create an even better space for persons with disability.
Wow. Fantastic, fantastic. Collaboration, not working in silos, but collaborating together for better inclusion. It's happened right here in front of us. Fantastic. Richa, I'll let you say whatever you want.
So Dr. Neeru, at Max Life, we say that for our people with disability, their ability is stronger than their disability. And that's what we want to build on, and that's what we want to celebrate. And to Ira's point, that if we start listing out what are the abilities that are required to do this job, I think, Ira, a very important aspect there is when we say that there is no voice at the table. A person is not goading them to think differently. I will continue to think the way I have thought all my life, because it's my blind spot, right? I go to a mall and I do what I have won there, and I come back. I don't even think that whether there's a ramp or not, because I don't need it, right? So hence having a voice at the table is so important, and that's why representation. And I think one of the things why there is such little amount of talk on this, Dr. Neeru, for a lot of companies, when we talk about diversity, we're still only talking about women, right? We're not talking about disability. We still look at it with the lens of sympathy and charity, right? And that's why, a lot of CSR initiatives around this, this stream of diversity. But I think it's extremely important that we all start looking at it, because every time I've interacted with a person with disability, I've realized that there are the way they think, the way they approach the problem is diametrically different from how I would have thought about it. And that is what makes the business more agile and more innovative. I mean, so many of our technological developments have happened only because they were initially thought about for people with disability. All of us today use that text-to-speech and that function on our phones. It was only devised for people with disability. You know, my son, who is 14 years old, does not type anything on Google. He just speaks in it. Imagine. So we all move forward when we take everyone with us, and I think that's the closing message.
So beautifully said. You know, on a closing note, I'll just say this, that there are people who don't still feel safe on coming out with their disability or their intersectionality or lack of equity. They need allies to help them get that psychological safety and create the space for them, either to talk about their primary disability or even the intersectionality part of it. I was coaching a woman with a disability, and she told me that she has a severe condition of the urinary bladder. She says, I get excruciating pain every 45 minutes, and I have to catheterize myself and go to the restroom. I said, 45 minutes, what do you do at night? She says, I get up. I said, what do you do in the office? She says, I hide my pain. I don't let anyone know that I have this condition too. And then she begged me, Dr. Neeru, please don't tell them. I said, why? She said, they're going to think I'm a nuisance. I'm a woman with a disability, and now I have a third thing. Who's going to like me? Who's going to keep me? This is not the kind of environment or culture we want to create. We want to create that space where there are allies and psychological safety. And you know what? Each one of you can be that ally. It doesn't have to be a badge meant only for a few select people or who are leading DEI. Each person can today, right now, decide that they want to be an ally. If this panel leaves you with this message, I think it's a great time spent together. I don't think we have time for question answers, because otherwise the MC and the organization team is going to say, you go home now. They're not going to let me sit through the rest of the day. So we'll take that offline. The speakers are going to be around for some time. You can connect with them and ask them questions, especially during lunch. And I will tell you this, we have a phenomenal presentation and dance performance with people of disabilities after lunch. If you missed that, you would have missed something. So stay the whole day, you'll get a chance to speak to the speakers, and you'll get to see have some phenomenal experiences. Thank you.